color mixing is key, obviously, for all of us painters. And we often end up looking like this. I don't know about you, but I do. I bumped into the concept of the prismatic palette and specifically Dumont's prismatic palette when I was watching this wonderful demo by John Trainer. He is an American Impressionist painter and he actually met Dumont. He was a student of Dumont. The reason why I wanted to show you this, besides recommending you to watch the 2-hour video, is because he actually there behind him is the Dumont prismatic palette. And I was seeing him using it as he was painting, but I wasn't really understanding the concept until I bumped into this particular article by Leslie Watkins, who, by the way, also painted an homage to Frank. That's the way it's called, this painting. And you can see the Dumont prismatic palette. What is this palette? So I cannot really explain in detail, but basically it does use the combination of the two theories of color. The chromatic theory of color that we all know from the color wheel, that's a chromatic color wheel, and then the physics of colors, which has to do with the wavelengths. And a lot of people have been actually saying, you know, the primary colors when you look at physics is not the same. And also the temperature, interestingly, the hottest of the wavelengths corresponds to blue, which in the chromatic color wheel, it's the coolest. So it is interesting to see how the combination of these two play an important role in understanding the prismatic palette. I also recommend you to watch this YouTube video, although I'm sure there's many, many others that sort of explain the rationale and the technology behind this concept of the prismatic palette. But basically what it is using a string of color that goes from the coolest to the warmest or from the warmest to the cooler. And you decide which are your favorite colors. As you can see on the painting by Leslie Watkins, the example there has the greens, the blues, violets, probably another type of earth color, and then you go on to you know the yellows and reds. In the left, you can see how John Trainer interprets his own idea of the prismatic palette and what are his favorite strings of color. But the concept is have cool on one side, have the warm on the other side, and make sure you can mix and match using this concept of the prismatic color palette. That allows you to have a better sense of the atmospheric effect you want, and really you detach your brain from thinking what is the local color. Now, I started looking, is there anything available that I can use for the prismatic palettes? And I'm sure there's many. I found this example is one for the oil painters. Usually they're wooden, and you can see how it works. You actually can close it, so you can also keep your oils in this kind of palette, and you can carry it with you if you're a plein air painter, and it's very convenient. Apparently I have not bought it. I don't use oil paints that much. I do use water-based oils and acrylics. So I started to look, would this be okay for acrylics, or is wood not the perfect sort of material? So I found this Charzy 3D Artist palette. Now, don't pay attention to the colors that are squeezed in there in the photograph, because that's not following the prismatic palette theory. You do see the theory on the left. You can see from warmest to coolest on the different strings of color, and you actually have in that particular, in the Dan Helsel palette, you have 6 different rows that you can use for your different best color combinations or hues. So I was thinking, could we adapt this kind of Charzy 3D palette to a prismatic palette? I guess you could. I have not bought it. I have not used it. But then I started thinking maybe just a simple box with different compartments, especially if it has a tight closure, can help you carry your acrylics that could be squeezed in. And if you turn it around, you can potentially use the lid putting a disposable paper palette taped in there. So you have your prismatic values, from the warm to the cool range of those particular hues. You could use how many compartments you want, have them ready, put them in vertical. You can probably use a duct tape or some sort of masking tape to hold the lid open in a probably 100-degree angle, and then have your palette paper and do your mixes in there. It's a potential. I haven't used it, but it's a potential that could be used for acrylic painters and use the concept of the prismatic palette. Now going into the color mixing, either if you are using one palette or another in the terms of the physical sense of the palette, you need to understand using the prismatic palette idea and limited palette. There's a great example in the Draw Mix Paint website by Mark Carter. And he does sell his own set of oils, but he does give wonderful explanations of how to match any color with oil paint, and he does use a very limited palette. This particular video that I'm showing now, it's on YouTube. It's about a half hour long, and it's beautiful because he actually goes through the steps of showing you how to match the color. You can see him doing it with the example of his colors. He has an updated video. It's a bit shorter, but he just explains in a better way these concepts of the temperature of the colors. And as you can see, it's truly a very limited palette. If you are a plein air painter, you can use this concept. You only have to carry about 5 colors, 5 tubes with you. And just remember the blue, the yellow, the red, brown, and white. Make sure that you understand your prismatic color values. And what he basically explains is when you're trying to match, first think, does my color need to go on the orange or on the greenish part or the yellowish part? And then once you get to what color that is and you make the mix, you actually find out, does this color mix look too warm compared to what I need or too cool? So if you need to warm it and darken it, you use brown. If you need to cool it and darken it, you use blue, etc. I don't want to go over his half-hour explanation because he does much better explanation than I can do, but it is extremely useful when you're starting to paint and you start to say, I want to use a limited palette. I personally have been lately using Indian yellow, alizarin crimson, and ultramarine blue with some raw umber and titanium white, and it does work very nicely. I am actually surprised at my own paintings when I see them, and I've been trying to remember these color mixing rules. So the concepts that he explains in his videos can be used for oil or acrylic paints. I'm not sure about watercolors, but I can tell you I use them in acrylics, and I have actually liked the way that they come out. For color mixing with acrylics, I have found many excellent tutorials, but there's nothing like Will Kemp Art School. Not only for mixing colors, but for his mixing colors, he has created a playlist. But don't get fooled, this playlist only has 5 videos. He has other mixing color videos in his website, and that's in the YouTube channel, so don't miss these. He is fabulous. I mean, I really like the way he explains, and he makes you see how, combining reds and blues. If you have the warms, the cools, the warms and the cools, what happens when you're mixing 2 of the warms, warm blue and warm red compared to the warm red and the cool blue. And what he's saying is just know what the result is going to be so that you understand what you need to do. All right, so go ahead, go to your easel and start painting.